Hello, I'm Ellen Binns coming today from Wheaton, Illinois in the USA. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson, coming today from Leigh-on-Sea in the UK. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our hearts to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and go behind the headlines of a critical happening in our world that needs our attention right now.
In today's episode, we take one of these regular deep dives to more fully understand and tune in with something many of us may know only a little about, and see where we might hone in with our prayers and intentions. And as we record, it's July 15th, 2026.
And today we take a look at the world's youngest country, which is also one of its poorest and most conflict-ridden, South Sudan, which was formed just 15 years ago after separating from its northerly neighbor, Sudan. We explore what the country has achieved in its time of independence, what challenges it now faces, and what its hopes and prospects are for the future. The country became independent in July 2011. In fact, I think it was last week they marked that anniversary. After decades of civil war and an overwhelming referendum vote in favor of breaking from Sudan. Since that time, South Sudan has achieved international recognition, some institutional consolidation, and tentative peace agreements, but persistent conflict, economic collapse, displacement, and climate shocks continue to threaten its future. As such, this is a tense time for a country that finds itself at a crossroads with either more war, famine, and isolation, or a more hopeful future in prospect. Our intention and prayers are sorely needed to move the country's people and leadership on the path of wisdom and healing.
So it's interesting to understand how the independence came about. South Sudan's path to statehood is rooted in Sudan's post-colonial history, where power and resources became concentrated in the Arab-dominated north after independence from Anglo-Egyptian rule in 1956. Southern Sudanese communities, largely non-Arab and Christian or followers of traditional religions, were politically marginalized and faced underinvestment and attempts at cultural and religious homogenization, which set the stage for armed resistance. Two long civil wars between the North and South, between 1955 to 1972 and 1983 to 2005, cost an estimated 2 million lives and displaced more than 4 million people through violence, famine, and disease. Many in the Second War united around the Sudan People's Liberation Movement / Army, the SPLM/A, and remember that, SPLM later, which initially sought a reformed secular New Sudan, but later embraced the demand for Southern independence. A peace agreement in 2005 ended the Second War, granting the South temporary autonomy, a share of oil revenues, and the promise of a referendum on independence after 6 years. The referendum took place in January 2011, when nearly 99% of voters in the South opted for separation, and South Sudan formally declared independence on July 9th, 2011, becoming the world's newest state and the UN's 193rd member. At its independence, South Sudan comprised the 10 southernmost states of the former Sudan and was one of Africa's most ethnically diverse countries, with more than 60 major ethnic groups. The new government inherited vast oil reserves, but almost no infrastructure, a limited administration capacity, and very weak institutions. Oil provided the overwhelming share of state revenue, but most pipeline and export infrastructure ran through the Republic of Sudan to Port Sudan on the Red Sea, creating immediate disputes over transit fees and border demarcation. Relations with Sudan were further strained by unresolved issues in border areas such as Ubaye and the status of populations with ties on both sides of the international border.
Interesting, is it? As is
Yeah,
often the
so good and
case,
bad. Yeah,
the geography playing such a critical part in the fortunes of the country being landlocked and depending on Sudan for getting its oil to to the seaport or
I
indeed.
know, it's kind
Yeah,
of dependent on
yeah, yeah,
Sudan. Yeah.
yeah. Striking as well how much time Sudan had been in civil war. That was close to 40 years in a 50-year
Oh
period.
my god.
And of course, it's still, as we know, we've mentioned before, the last, what is it now? We're in the fourth year of another civil war in Sudan. It seems to be the norm there, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, and you wonder if they're just used to it. They're not thinking of something else.
No, no, no,
So
no.
to say, like peace.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, at the moment, it's two warring generals or two warring.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. However, much for South Sudan has been achieved in the past 15 years. Firstly, the country quickly gained broad international recognition, joining the United Nations, as we mentioned, and the African Union in 2011, and later a range of regional and other multinational bodies. Its international status has enabled it to receive substantial humanitarian and development assistance, as well as to participate in regional peace and security initiatives in East Africa. Diplomatic efforts, often mediated by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development and backed by the African Union and United Nations, have produced several peace agreements, including major power sharing deals in 2015 and a revitalized peace agreement in 2018. These agreements have likely reduced large scale fighting in some periods and created a framework for transitional governance. Attention has also been given to state building and establishing legal frameworks, with core institutions of state being put in place. These include a presidency, legislature, judiciary, and central bank, along with national and state level ministries. Basic legal frameworks, such as provisional constitutional arrangements and laws for public finance and petroleum management, have gradually been put in place, even if enforcement remains weak. Steps have also been taken to draft and consult on a new basic law, although this process has repeatedly slipped behind schedule. As such, the state's social contract with its people remains unresolved 15 years on from the succession. It's incredible to imagine what it must be like in a country that doesn't really have a established law in place, really, established laws for
Yeah.
many basic things that, obviously we are very used to as well established democracies.
Right.
Humanitarian agencies, often working with national authorities, have built up emergency health, nutrition, and education services in many areas, helping to prevent higher mortality and displacement during conflict and floods. International programs have also supported vaccination campaigns, primary schooling, and food assistance, sometimes reaching millions of South Sudanese in a given year. There have also been gains in some human development indicators from the very low baseline at independence. For example, increased access to basic education and health services, as we said, in some regions, although these gains are fragile and unevenly distributed. The state's own capacity to deliver services remains limited, but cooperation between communities, churches, NGOs, and external partners has been a crucial survival mechanism.
And it's interesting when I did a little research about South Sudan, I found out that the median age is 19.
Extraordinary, isn't
That
it?
seems so young.
Yes.
I don't know what the median age of the UK or the United States, but I'm pretty sure it's quite a bit higher.
UK is probably about 70.
Yeah.
It's certainly an aging population.
Yeah. So sadly, the last 15 years have not always seen peace. Following independence, political rivalry within the SPLM that we talked about before escalated into a devastating internal civil war in December of 2013, mainly between forces loyal to the president, largely from the Dinka communities, and those aligned with the former vice president who was associated with the Neuer communities. The conflict was marked with atrocities, ethnic targeting, and widespread sexual and gender based violence involving various armed groups and regional actors. In 2018, a revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in the Republic of South Sudan led to a formal ceasefire in many areas, the return of the vice president, and a fragile power sharing government. This arrangement has not ended violence altogether, but it has reduced nationwide fighting and opened limited space for dialogue, humanitarian access, and talk of elections.
Hmm. So, what are the current challenges facing the country as it marks its anniversary of independence? The country is facing several major challenges, including its precarious political transition, with repeated delays to implementing key provisions of the peace agreement, such as unifying rival armed forces we've been talking about into a single national army. Elections, which were originally envisaged earlier in the transition, were previously postponed until 2024 and then further delayed, leaving the country in an extended interim period under the same elite coalition. Power remains highly personalized and concentrated among a small circle of military political leaders, often described by analysts as a violent kleptocracy. I have to say that again, as a violent kleptocracy in which corruption and patronage are central to the system. Rivalries within this elite, combined with limited civic space and weak institutions, create constant risk, and national level fractures could again cascade into large-scale conflict. Next, South Sudan's economy is hugely dependent on oil, which accounts for the majority of exports and government revenue, making it acutely vulnerable to price swings, pipeline disruptions, and disputes with Sudan. Years of conflict, mismanagement, and corruption have eroded fiscal discipline, left public wages in arrears, and undermined basic budget transparency. Recent World Bank analysis describes the country as facing a narrow path to recovery, emphasizing that restoring public finances and undertaking climate smart development are essential to reverse economic decline. Non-oil sectors such as agriculture remain undeveloped despite significant potential, and large parts of the population rely on subsistence farming, pastoralism, and humanitarian food aid. The war since 2013 produced one of the world's largest displacement crises. Millions of South Sudanese were uprooted internally or sought refuge in neighboring countries. At various points, United Nations agencies have warned that nearly half of the population faces acute food insecurity, and famine-like conditions have emerged in some conflict-affected areas. As we know, we mentioned this quite a number of times before, the actual technical definition criteria for being declared in famine are very, very tight, but they seem to be very, very close to that in many areas. Ongoing violence, limited access, and bureaucratic impediments remain major obstacles to reaching people in need, with many communities remaining without reliable access to health services, education, or livelihoods. Local violence is often in evidence, including cattle raiding, revenge attacks, and disputes over land and resources among local communities. These conflicts are frequently intertwined with national politics, as elites arm local militias or exploit grievances for wider power struggles. A weak rule of law, the proliferation of small arms, and a lack of inclusive local governance mechanisms make it difficult to resolve disputes peacefully. And then there are the effects of climate change. South Sudan is exceptionally exposed to climate shocks, especially the increasingly frequent and severe flooding along the Nile and Sud wetlands, erratic rainfall, as well as periodic droughts. Displacement of people and deepening poverty have resulted, while flooding has submerged large areas of arable land and destroyed crops and livestock, undermining food security and livelihoods. Environmental pressures are also evident in competition over grazing areas and water sources, which may inflame communal violence and hinder the return and resettlement of displaced populations.
Well, even with all this bad news, many continue to have hope for their country's future. A priority for plotting a more hopeful course is political stabilization. Easier said than done, right? The revitalized peace agreement remains the main framework for political stabilization and its full implementation, especially security sector reform, integrated armed forces, and a credible constitutional and electoral process, offers the clearest route out of permanent impasse. If national elections can be conducted under an agreed legal framework that ensures basic fairness and inclusive participation, they could help renew political legitimacy, though they also risk exacerbating tensions if poorly prepared. Many analysts suggest that the broader inclusion of civil society, churches, women's groups, and youth movements in peace and constitutional processes is essential to shift the political culture away from purely militarized, elite driven bargaining. The strong role of faith based actors and community leaders in mediation gives some grounds for hope that bottom up pressure for peace and accountability will continue. And the younger generation is also making its voice known. As we said, the median age is 19, so I
Mhm.
guess there are a lot of them.
Yeah, yeah.
According to Save the Children, children and teenagers who are now growing up in South Sudan are calling on its leaders to listen to children and include them in decision making. Teenagers engage in a national radio station debate show to question politicians. One of their representatives, Naomi, said, "We're learning together. Some days there's progress, like seeing new schools, boreholes. Other days, there are challenges, like floods or conflict. But there's always this feeling that we're building something together. The leaders of South Sudan need to listen to young people and include us in decisions, whether the decisions are hard or simple, because every decision being made now is something that will affect our future tomorrow, whether negatively or positively." She expresses cautious optimism, but is realistic about the huge problems her generation faces. I love that. I
It's
love that they're speaking up and
yeah,
taking part.
incredibly positive perspective
Yes,
as well, isn't it? Really, really quite.
really a message for the whole world,
Yes.
right? Key for the country moving forward is economic diversification and climate resilient development. Moving beyond oil dependence is widely recognized as being critical for long term stability, with agriculture, livestock, and regional trade frequently identified as sectors with significant potential. A climate smart development pathway, improving flood management, investing in resilient infrastructure, and supporting sustainable land use, could not only reduce disaster risk, but also unlock livelihoods for rural communities.
Mm,
Improved public financial management, increased transparency in oil revenue, and efforts to curb corruption are central to these prospects, as they would allow the state to invest more effectively in infrastructure, education, and health. International partners also emphasize that external support will be most effective where there is political will to reform and protect basic rights. Despite the deep trauma they have suffered, many South Sudanese continue to express strong attachment to the idea of an independent nation, rooted in the sacrifices of their long struggle for freedom. This shared memory can be a motivation for reconciliation if reinterpreted as a call to build a more inclusive and accountable state, rather than a justification for narrow ethnic dominance. Mechanisms for transitional justice, such as a proposed hybrid court, truth telling processes, and community level reconciliation initiatives, remain largely unimplemented, but could help address impunity and rebuild trust if they are taken seriously. So, to sum up, the people of South Sudan won their freedom at enormous cost, but are now wrestling with what it means to make that freedom real in everyday life. The challenges are real, but the prospects for moving forward in peace and with hope for a brighter future are not beyond fantasy.
and again, hearing comments like the spokesman we heard, Naomi, for young people,
Hmm.
even in spite of this period of conflict and displacement and drought and flooding, to have that hope and to have that vision
Right,
in those
right.
extraordinary circumstances, I think, as you said, it is a message for for everyone, isn't it, really? An
Hmm.
example. Um,
Yeah.
really, really quite something.
I wonder
So,
how willing they are to receive help from outside countries who have done this before, who have,
yes,
who could
yes.
give them insights and tips on how to do this. I don't know.
No, and as we were saying, there's so much depending as well on the political will and whether these
Yeah.
these guys at the top,
Yeah.
as they are guys,
Mhm.
can actually agree to disagree
Yeah.
and actually
Right.
put the country's needs rather than their own political ambitions.
It feels like they need to have those elections. That's the first step.
Yes, yes, yes,
But
and
why would the people at the top be motivated to do that?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, they're not necessarily motivated to put a robust legal system in place very quickly
Mhm.
either,
Mhm.
protects rights. So, with all that in mind, where might we hone in with our intention and prayers? So, this is the point, as always. We'll put a bookmark in the show notes where you might want to come back to pause, to allow yourself time to focus on these are intentions, indeed others that may come to you that we suggest now. So, as always, just allowing yourself proper time to do this and pausing between each suggestion as you feel appropriate. Taking a moment then to allow yourself to become present where you are, letting go of other distractions, and taking time to become deeply centered as we offer these suggestions. We celebrate and give thanks for what the people of South Sudan have achieved in the 15 years since their independence, and will that the country's younger generation will be moved to build a country that sees peace and relief from its many years of suffering.
We ask that those who have influence and power in all levels of government will be moved to restore public finances, resist financial mismanagement, and reverse economic decline.
We will that those in government who have appropriate authority or influence are moved and have wisdom to know how to encourage a stronger economy for South Sudan, including for incentivizing growth in non-oil sectors.
We will that government officials, company, and community leaders will have wisdom to recognize and undertake climate smart developments, including water saving and drought or flood resistant innovations for agriculture.
We pray that those who perpetuate violence, restrict access, or apply bureaucratic impediments that frustrate aid services reaching people in need of food and medical support are moved to remove these obstacles.
We ask that all necessary parties in government, the judiciary, and civil society in South Sudan resolve to fully implement the terms agreed by the revitalized peace agreement.
We will that all who have influence will be moved to redouble their efforts to establish mechanisms for justice and agreeing a basic law that protects the highest interests of all people of South Sudan.
And this week, as we reflect on the challenges and opportunities facing South Sudan as it marks 15 years of independence, we suggest holding as our main attention. We will that all South Sudanese people will be moved to unite in meeting the challenges they are facing and recognize the prospects for moving forward in peace.
Hmm.
Please join us in holding this.
That about wraps it up for this episode. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in my daily Insight Timer offerings, and with Ellen in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out too for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us in Holding Intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. In the meantime, thank you, go well, stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Binns and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.